Oops, wrong button. Just to prove it exists, there's the cartoon that wasn't there yesterday. Sad, sad, sad. Calvin and Hobbes, best cartoon ever. I would comic strip at least so far. That'd be a good spar debate. Best cartoon, TV cartoon.
South Park. Oh, that was right.
Who were the two kids? This would have been you guys. Dragon Tales. Remember the two kids that would. That was a good one. All right. So yesterday we were running through different. I know you already have this, but we're going through the different types of claims so far, warrants and things like that. Essentially, remember that the structure of the Toulmin model and the basic structure. Notice up here. You logically look at that data, the reasoning, and that helps you form the claim. Now, traditionally, I think a lot of us end up kind of going backwards, and that would be self-admitted. Jake, what made you go to Akron? I'm not picking on you or making fun of the place. I know very little other than it's in Ohio. Why there?
I really like the campus, and people are really helpful, and it's like the labs and everything they set up.
When you started the whole choosing college process, like, was that already spot on the list that you were thinking about, or it was after going there where?
My friend told me about it, and then I was like, I guess I'll go visit. I went there and I'm trying to get that feeling,
That's how you know. Okay. So basically, he did the Toulmin model in the way that you would kind of hope, where he went there, collected data, evidence, not knowing that you were necessarily going to go there, kind of did his own warrant, reasoning, logic in his head, and then made his college choice. Certainly, and I don't know if it applies to any one of us in the room, some of us growing up, for whatever reason, I need to go to Penn State. Carnegie Mellon has always been a dream. Slippery Rock. By the time I was 3, I knew that was the place for me. And then you convince yourself, based on the data, evidence, warning, that yes, I'm right. So when it does come to decisions that hopefully are going to be significant and impactful, you kind of go through this data collection standpoint. Other parts, and a lot of times, certainly this happens within politics, and I think I mentioned earlier in the beginning of the semester, too bad it wasn't a fall class. We might not have much to talk about come, politics and current events. We took care of that problem this past week. We'll have plenty of stuff to talk about. People will make their claims based on, this is what I believe. Now I need to kind of go back and find evidence to ultimately support it. And again, that's the idea that we're trying to ultimately stay away from. So we're running through our claims. Remember, the 3 types of claims that we have would be fact, judgment, value. Jake, you can get these notes online or borrow someone's. But fact would mean something that you absolutely have to prove. Judgment, value is going to be more of an opinion. Policy is more of like a legislation that you would be looking to put through. So the whole travel ban would be an example of a policy debate or legislation going through. If you agree with it, that would be more of a judgment value. Down the road, there could be an argument as to whether or not the travel ban, immigration ban is effective. That would be probably more of a fact base that would take place. Certainly, when it comes to evidence, we collect some data. Those things could be coming from the source credibility, actual statistics, analysis, reasoning, those kinds of things that you're going to offer as proof. And then when it comes to your warrants, generally we go with that ethos, logos, pathos, as well as those shared values. Right now, if a person is in favor of the executive order that went through over the weekend about travel ban, what would be like a shared value that people would have as to this is why it makes sense? What would be a shared value? Again, whether or not you agree with it doesn't matter, but what's the value that they're trying to tap into?
Nationalism.
Could be nationalism, safety. That's going to be, I'd say probably that safety kind of aspect, and nationalism certainly would go along with it. If a person is against the immigration ban, travel ban, what would be a shared value that they would have as to why this should not go through? Freedom. National. Yeah, it's funny how sometimes you can get those values that could go either way. But yeah, in some ways it can end up being a freedom versus a safety kind of issue. Right?
Traditional.
Yeah, like if and we don't all know our ancestry necessarily, but pretty good chance that most of us, our ancestry is going to take us across oceans, to other certain places that not going to be indigenous people. So tradition, nationalism, freedom versus safety, and in some cases nationalism. Those are where values can certainly come across one another. And with the lottery, certainly would be an example of values, tradition versus what would be a shared value if you disagree with the lottery, which all of you did. Everyone has the right to life. So, tradition versus life, is that something that people would be willing to argue against? So, we were going through those, and then we were starting to get to our examples practice here that we're having. Remember, your quiz on Friday is going to be set up in the same way, where you have 3 statements. One of them you have to identify data, one's going to be the claim, one's going to be the warrant. The one that I would suggest doing first would be the claim, figuring out what the argument is, then what is the evidence that supports that argument, and then what would be the reasoning for it. So, how about, a little too close for you. Jake, we're going to put you on the spot since this is all new to you. First one up here. Capital punishment involves taking another's life. Capital punishment is morally wrong. Taking another's life is murder. Of those 3 statements, and this is Jake and Jake only, which one of these do you think would be the main argument or claim that a person would be trying to convince another one of? I'd say no. I'd say that'd be choice B. Yes. And what do we mean by capital punishment? Death penalty. Okay. So of those statements, the one that is going to be argumentative, capital punishment is morally wrong. What would be the reason, the evidence that a person arguing the capital punishment is morally wrong would use?
Capital punishment involves taking another's life.
Okay, why is it morally wrong? Because if you are involved in capital punishment, you are taking another person's life. What is the reasoning that then links those 2 things together? Well, the fact that you are taking another's life, that equates to murder. People understand that murder is not appropriate, hence that would be why an argument could be made. Capital punishment is morally wrong. I don't want to bore you with going over example after example. We okay as to what the overall setup structure is going to be of Friday's quiz. You're going to have 4 sets of statements, 3 in each set. Data, claim, warrant. Martin's got it. No copying. The academic fraud. Not a pit test. No 10-point curves. You get what you get, and you don't get upset. Okay. Look at this situation. What do we see? Not looking good, is it? And who else is there? We got a lady, not dead, doing the scream face. Oh no. Did we have a slip or a trip? Margaret and her husband got into a fight. Tisk tisk. She stormed out of the house and then left him at home alone. Margaret drove to her country club where a party was going on. Everyone there complimented Margaret on her dress and how well it fit her slender figure, and that made her feel a little better. Margaret just left before 1 in the morning, 1 a.m., and invited a few friends to follow her home for one more drink. She got home 10 minutes before they arrived, but when her friends rang the doorbell, Margaret ran outside saying something terrible happened. Charles slipped and fell on the stairs. He was coming down for another drink, and I think he's dead. Oh my God, what should I do? You're not believing this. The police concluded that Charles died from a wound on the head and confirmed the fact that he had been drunk. What do you think happened? So, based on the evidence of the picture, and I can zoom into different points, I want you to just take a couple minutes. I don't want you to raise hand quite yet, but I want you to come up with a claim. He killed her, or excuse me, she killed him, he slipped. I want you to come up with evidence, and again, I can zoom into certain areas. Of course, the picture's purposely fuzzy to make things a little bit more ambiguous. And I want you to come up with a reason that would kind of connect that evidence to your claim. So you can do this mentally in your head, but I want you to come up with evidence or with a claim. But I want you to have some kind of evidence coming from the picture that would help you. And if you need me to zoom in on certain areas, I can do that.
I have a question.
Yep.
Why is there something cooking on the stove at 1 a.m.?
Well, her friends are coming over for another drink, so they have to have like little appetizers as well. Well, you know, if she's a proper host, so be beverages. I would say, you know the little crescent roll, Steven, you know the little crescent roll like hot dog wieners, like pigs in a blanket. I think that's what she's making.
She's making some finger food
Yeah.
for her husband instead of the stairwell next to her. She did it.
No one's that casual. She's done it.
I thought she walked in the house, saw her husband dead, and ran back out. How'd she have time to throw that on the scale?
Yeah, she did it. Guaranteed, 100%.
And he's walking up the stairs, so if he tripped, he would have fallen forward.
She got home 10 minutes before they arrived, but when her friends rang the doorbell, Margaret ran outside saying something terrible had happened. So I'm not discounting what you're saying, but the implication would be that his home, and then he falls down the steps or whatever happens. But this is to, again, explain that. Not saying that she didn't do it or did, but the idea is that she would be preparing things because she's there 10 minutes before the guests arrive. And so starting to cook food, get things ready, and then as the guests arrive, boom, 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 down the steps comes. Ryan?
If he was coming down the stairs, how would you end up with that facing the stairs?
So, okay, you go and claim now at this point? Okay, so claim she did it, evidence the fact that he's facing upwards. Okay.
Okay, so I can see both arguments. Based on the picture, how do you trip someone when they're going up the stairs? If you trip someone while they're going up the stairs, they'd fall forward because you have your body weight positioned forward. So it suggests because he was drunk, he was wobbly, and he was leaning back. Obviously, at that point, she can trip him also. But based off the passage,
Well, I want for the tripping, saying something. He slipped and fell on the stairs. So he was coming down for another drink. So she would be saying that he was descending the stairs, and that's how he tripped. So you're saying that he would have been going up based kind of similar to the way that Ryan said, based on the way that. Okay.
also, based off the passage, why would you invite friends over after you just had a fight with your spouse? Wouldn't you want to reconcile with them? Like, why would you invite people over? It's probably not a good enough time to invite people over.
Okay.
So
She brought witnesses.
exactly,
She brought witnesses to say that she didn't do it. Guaranteed.
exactly.
So this is helping establish her alibi. Would
Yes.
be okay.
Yeah.
Stephen, and then Luke, come over to you.
It was her for one reason only. If you go back to the passage, it said that he had one wound to the head. And if you're falling on stairs,
You're
nine
gonna have
times out of
multiple
10, you're gonna have
wounds.
bruises on your arms or your hand, something. It said that he died from one wound to the head.
From a wound on the head, and confirm the fact that he had been drunk. I guess you could. I always play devil's advocate because that's the fun
Yeah,
part.
that's what
I guess you could argue that it does say a wound, but it could be like repeated trauma to the head. So if I slip and I fall down the stairs, I have one wound, but I had like over and over to that wound, possibly.
But
You
how
know,
are you gonna
could
hit the same part of your head multiple times?
it could be. It could be tricky. It could be tricky. Good aim. Luke?
It doesn't necessarily say that it was one spot on the head specifically. Additionally, there are multiple factors in this.
Is this your client? Are you the defense attorney?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
That show that she had no intention, that she had no part in the death of her husband. First, the stuff on the stove, she was clearly preparing food prior to her guests arriving, which was 10 minutes before. She knew that she would be having guests over, so why would she knowingly invite people over whenever she was going to murder her husband?
And this is where your alibi argument comes in.
Witness.
But it just doesn't make sense to knowingly invite people over whenever he could still be alive, potentially. And he could potentially still be alive or just unconscious. And then he wakes up while you're there and says, "No, my wife beat me over the head." There's always the potential for that. So if she is as smart as you claim her to be, then she would realize that murdering her husband in that way through blunt trauma to the head
Thank you for your statement, counsel. Mike, did you have something? No. Joe?
So my argument, why do we have to believe in drunk woman saying that her husband actually went down the steps? What it looks like from the picture is that he was at the top of the steps. He fell down back and went the whole way down like that.
Mhm.
And probably what was happening is she was cooking something and then that happened and she's like drunk, so she's like, oh crap, what do I do? And then you say her like that.
So you would say trip?
Yeah.
So accidental, but circumstances just don't put her in a good light.
Yeah.
Okay. Becca, last one, and then we'll get.
And it never said like that he didn't have any other bruises or anything on his arms. It just said that the reason that he died was because of that one wound on his head
Okay.
from falling, I guess.
So, and this would be like going back to Stephen's point. He could have other wounds, but it's the wound to the head that is the ultimate reason for death. Can you tell what's in his hand? So, drink. Anything odd about him having a drink in his hand? Pardon?
Gotta save the beer.
He's a gentleman.
You gotta keep it alive.
If you fall down the steps, what are you doing?
Dropping that glass.
I'm gonna drop the glass and try to catch myself.
Wasn't he coming down?
She put it in the same thing. I have a new answer.
When people fall down the stairs, they drop what they are carrying to save themselves or to at least try to stop the fall. Now, again, can we still come up with Luke's counter arguments and other reasons? Absolutely, you can. But the whole idea here behind is you make a claim, but you have specific evidence that you can take a look at, and then the rule essentially would be the warrant, the reasoning, the logic that ties those things together. So what you wouldn't want to have happen in a situation like this is she is clearly lying. Look, he's holding a drink in his hand. Some people might understand what you mean by it, but when it comes to the argument, it's the explanation then, well, why is that such a big deal that the drink is still in his hand? Why is it such a big deal that it's just the one wound on his head? Or the fact that, hey, look, she did it. There's appetizers on the stove. Well, what's the correlation? That's where that warrant, that reasoning is so important. And the problem, I think, when it does come to the overall warrant, why people neglect it, and we'll talk about all the more stuff that's on here, when it's your argument, your evidence makes total sense. Because you're convincing yourself of something that you believe. That's not hard to do. But if you are convincing other people who either don't believe you or don't agree with you, would be a better word, or don't know, not in the sense that they are ignorant or stupid of any kind of, lacking knowledge, but that they are undecided, you want to make that connection between your evidence and your claim as simple and clear as possible. And it sounds obvious, but those are the types of things that we tend to neglect. Now, before you had the simple model, you can see that this one is the advanced model, and we'll go into detail about it. Essentially, everything is taking place within this warrant reasoning place. You have backing, you also have modality, and you also have rebuttal. I do want to make this perfectly clear. Your quiz on Friday, it is claim warrant data. So there is nothing on your quiz that is going to be bringing in rebuttals, modality, backing, any of that kind of stuff. Now, I told you when we do midterm exam, we go over all the terms and definitions and things like that. This will certainly show up on that. But for Friday, you're only worried about claim, data, warrant. I want you to have the simple Toulmin model in mind before we go into all the other parts. But in most arguments that you create or partake in, these will certainly be active parts of it and things that you'd want to be aware of. Everyone good with their little pictures? Nope.
Yes.
Someday there'll be a cane model.
Probably.
I think there will be.
What would you make it?
It would probably be the cane tree, the compare contrast.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that'll be showing up in composition books. So when there's little Miller children, you'll be like, hey,
I don't think their last name's Miller,
hey, Mrs. Burns, she kept maiden name. You do what you want. Backing. backing is essentially your secondary warning, your secondary reasoning. Hopefully your arguments aren't just based on one leap that is taking place, but that you have additional backing that would go with it, additional reasoning, additional logic. So there's only, the drink was in his hand. Well, if you're going to fall, you would certainly try to stop yourself. You would put your hands up against the wall, or you would put your hands down on the ground to try to stop the fall. You would try to grab onto, a lighting sconce or something that is on the wall, or the banister, or the rail. That would all be the warrant, as well as the backing, the reasoning, and additional reasons that would kind of come along with it. So most arguments are going to have more than one reason, one kind of support, one kind of reasoning, logic that's going with it. That's all that the backing is. It's like the secondary reasoning behind it. Tuesdays are the worst day of the week. Why?
We're not even halfway through the week yet. Still thinking about the weekend.
So you're not halfway through the week yet. You still have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It's still close enough that you are remembering the weekend, but you realize it's over, and yet the next weekend is still so far away. That would all be reasoning, warrant, backing up, more backing that's kind of going along with it. So backing, just kind of think of additional warrants that would be taking place. Modality and rebuttals. Modality refers to the degree of certainty of any argument. If there are two words that you want to avoid at all costs within an argument, so far as a degree of certainty, anybody have any idea?
I think could and maybe.
I would agree those would be two that I want to steer clear of because they make you sound kind of wishy-washy that you don't really have a decision. I would say there's two more that could really, though, put you in a really, really tight spot. But I would certainly agree those are probably going to be weak words. Pardon? Not necessarily. Could be, kind of depending on how it's getting utilized. Tuesdays are always the worst day of the week. What have I set myself up for?
Influence. I get the specific word.
Always.
Absence.
What's the
Always
problem
and
with
never.
always?
It's an absolute.
It's all a person would have to do is prove one exception. Not that you would have to go, no, Wednesdays are always the worst day, but you could go, actually, last week I stubbed my toe on Thursday, and it really hurt. I fractured my pinky, whatever. You come up with one exception, you have just defeated an always, or what would be the opposite?
Never.
Like never, okay? Nothing ever happens, or we could do poor English here, nothing never good ever happens on, a Tuesday. And Nick could go, well, my birthday was last Tuesday. I thought it was good. Or we had a 2-hour delay, 1.5 hour modified schedule, on a Tuesday. I got to sleep in. I didn't have to take my physics test. That was good. So I would say a rule of thumb, always, never would be words that you want to avoid. Now, Meredith, you said could and what was the other one? Maybe. Those can certainly be words that might kind of sound very, very weak. And Martin was mentioning if, kind of depending on the way the argument is worded, could be an issue. Probably, though, lets you know more often than not this is the case. Most of the time, Tuesdays are not good days. That lets me know from my argument that I'm going Tuesdays are generally the worst day, and generally would still be a word. However, there could be exceptions that every now and then a day of the week could be worse, or something good might actually happen on a Tuesday. It just so happens that tends to be few and far between. So probably, possibly, apparently, likely, those are all examples of modality where there is a degree of certainty. One of the other things that people sometimes fall into, 90% of the time, mention a statistic, and again, the problem with numbers.
You can modify them to what claim you're making.
Or all I have to do is mathematically come up with, no, that wasn't 90, that was 3 out of 4. That's only 75%. Now we're talking a 15% difference. But statistics can be kind of deadly because you can use them, you can tailor them to fit your argument. But if you can tailor them to fit your argument, then the opposite is probably also true of the other person. Especially when you get 52% of people are not in favor of capital punishment. I'm making this number up, don't quote me on it. If my argument is 52% of the United States population are not in favor of capital punishment, that is why we should get rid of it. What's Luke going to say on the opposing side? I bet you won't say 48. Basically half of the population. Essentially, we've now said the same thing. So we're not really doing anything to convince them. Now, I might kind of tweak it and go with the majority, which technically, would be true. But if you're talking like a 51, 49, 52, 48, basically we're saying the same number of people. So you want to be careful how you kind of set those things up. Rebuttals is a tricky term, simply for the fact that we use it to mean multiple things. You folks did rebuttals when we did the spar debates. You talked for 60 seconds? Well, when most of us did our spar debates. You're sparring against me tomorrow if he's not here, and vice versa. And then you had your 30-second rebuttal time. And so a lot of times we use counter arguments to simply mean rebuttals. However, it can also mean exceptions to the claim, intervening factors. This is not a problem for you to acknowledge. Have you sent Jake the paperwork where you will enroll in Akron? Like it's done, final. You paid money. I hope nothing bad happens between now and beginning of next semester. Hopefully not. It's too late for his rebuttals. He could go. I've decided to go to Akron, and I'm probably modality going to go there. I'm pretty certain, unless they withdraw a scholarship or grant, or they increase housing costs or something, some unforeseen factor that you don't know. That would be an example of a rebuttal. And so those are ways in which you can modify your argument, tailor your argument, because certainly from time to time there are going to be some kind of exceptions that would take place. And there's nothing wrong with you acknowledging that. That doesn't weaken an argument. If anything, I would say that makes it a little bit stronger because it illustrates that you are aware of other things that are going on. Clearly, this is probably no longer accurate, but we'll pretend that it is. The Pirates could have one of the better starting pitching staffs in the National League. Could. Meredith, I used one of your words there. Grounds. It's evidence. Experts agree that good starting pitching is critical to making the playoffs. So why is this important that grounds the evidence that I'm bringing? Well, experts agree that if you have good starting pitching, you can make the playoffs. However, injuries can quickly debilitate a Major League Baseball pitching staff. So there's a rebuttal. Playoff teams traditionally are in the top 10 in team ERA and opponent batting average. So I have backing. I also have modality. What's my modality? What is my term that would be my degree of certainty? In playoff teams traditionally are in the top 10 in team ERA and opponent batting average. It's not a common term necessarily, Kendall.
Same traditionally.
Traditionally. So it's basically like going most of the time, but it doesn't sound, kind of as weak. So there certainly could still be exceptions to it. The Pirates will probably make the playoffs this year. The claim will probably make the playoffs, and again, you have that modality of probably, not saying it's a guarantee, not going to Vegas and putting a mortgage payment on it, but saying that it probably won't happen this year. So that's how all of those things kind of work together within the context of an argument. All right, similar, and again, this is not what you're going to be doing on Friday. I want to make that perfectly clear. Yours is going to be 3 statements, but let's still try to do this anyway. Where would we see the claim? Where would we see things like additional backing, rebuttals, things along those lines? It's time for you to start working on your term paper. Your term paper will take about 1 month to complete. It took me 1 month to complete my term paper. You and I work at the same pace, unless you don't care about your grade as much as I do. So among those statements, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which one is the claim or the argument that one person is trying to convince another of? Meredith, you got a claim?
Your term paper will take about 1 month.
Not quite.
And the one.
The first one? Yes, that would be the claim. So it is time for you to start working on your term paper. So that would be the claim over here. What would be evidence as to why it is time for you to start working on your term paper? Stephen?
It took me 1 month to complete my term paper.
Not yet.
How would that be evidence?
We'll wait till we get the other parts, then we'll explain. Aaron? Not quite. Jake? Sarah? Yes.
Would that be a warrant?
Now, we'll get to this part, and then Steve, I'm not going to forget about you. Warrant and backing, you and I are, there'd be two of those, and they can kind of be interchangeable. So which one would be the reasoning then that's going to kind of hook those two things together? Okay, so this could be warrant, backing, and then what's the other one that's also going to be kind of warrant, backing, Luke? Took me about 1 month to complete mine, warrant, backing. And then what would be the final one? Unless you don't care, that would be considered that would be the rebuttal. At which point, it's not time for you to start working on it because you're not going to worry about the same grade the way that I would. Stephen, which one did you say so far as evidence? Was it the middle one? It took me 1 month? Okay. The reason being, and that you're not going to be doing one this complex for Friday, but the principle of it would still kind of work. This is what initially your term paper will take about 1 month to complete. This introduces that concept of a month, the time. This one then is also using that 1 month. So this kind of like introduces that timeline, and then this one explains why that timeline is important because it also took me 1 month to complete, and then you and I work at the same pace. Mr. King? Hey. Yep, I do. Sure, no problem. Yep, but. So if, and again, you're not going to have to worry about this many things. If you see one presenting some kind of number, evidence, reasoning, and then the next one connects that specific reasoning to that overall claim, the one that introduces it is going to be the evidence. The one that is then linking that evidence to the claim is going to be the warrant. But you're not going to have to worry about having 5 or 6 statements that you need to piece together. It's only going to be 3 that we're going to look at. That's it for Toulmin model. So Friday, again, those sets of 3. Kevin, that was the first office. I told him you said it. 7 more periods of Tuesday, Mary. I don't know if that's good or bad. We'll go better.
How is he Thursdays? Because